Can we simmer down, please? Okay. Okay. Okay, can we welcome to this special full council meeting. We have an important matter to consider today, and I intend, as always, to deal with the reports in front of us in an appropriate manner and look forward to a constructive debate. I hope I do not need to remind members to be respectful and courteous to each other and to council officers, even where there are issues of disagreement. Rona, can you provide the Sederunt and any apologies, please?
Yes, thank you, Leader. We have apologies from Councillors Brodie, Charteris and Fairbairn, and as we commence the meeting, Councillors Crothers and Ronnie are not present.
Okay. Do any members have a declaration of interest that they wish to make? No? No. Okay, so if we can go on to item 3, it's a standing order 6.6, requisition for a special meeting of full council, report by the Director of Corporate Services. This refers to the procedure which deals with the mechanics of the requisition submitted in accordance with standing order 6.6, requiring that this special meeting of council be held to deal with the business on the agenda. Now, I haven't received a separate report as such, and assume that we are noting the advice which is provided on the agenda itself. I assume that's correct. Well, I never received that. Has anybody else not received item 3? Because it wasn't actually on the council website, and I couldn't get into the intranet. So, anyway, I haven't seen it before. Yeah, it's the recommendation is that members are asked to note that in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 6.6, this meeting of the Council has been properly called and that the business items on the agenda relate to those identified in the requisition. Everybody happy to note that? Yeah. Right. Okay. We proceed to item 4. Okay. Item 4 is a report from the Acting Director of Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning, providing information for members requested in the requisition calling the special meeting. I have to say I'm a wee bit disappointed that some of the grammatical errors and typos which I pointed out on Friday haven't actually been corrected. Some of them have and some of them haven't, but I don't think that's either here nor there. Can I ask invite the Acting Director to update members on anything?
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, members. I'm sorry if there are errors of grammatical nature in the report that were not picked up. My apologies for that. There is nothing further to update with regards to this report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
There was one thing. I understand that we now have details of the number of probationers allocated to us.
Very pleased to hear that we have 108 probationers allocated to Dumfries and Galloway. I think it is the highest number of probationers we have ever been allocated. It's very important to us to have our new talent coming through, and our trainee teachers will be with us for the forthcoming year. So we're looking forward to welcoming them to our workforce in June and to our schools over the course of next year.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the meeting to member debate, but first of all I'm going to invite the Leader of the Opposition to expand on the requisition that his group have and others have put in. I'm hoping that you're going to clarify some of the points made in it. I don't understand the reference to child autism in inverted commas being on the increase, because autism is a lifelong condition which some people are born with, and thankfully diagnosis and understanding of autism has much improved, although it may be not as much as it needs to be. And similarly, I'd like an explanation of what, quote, standing the principles of GERFECT and the Council's inclusion of children policy actually means. But maybe you can enlighten us in your speech. And it's now over to you, Councillor Crothers. After that, I'm going to call the Chair of SIPL to make some points, and then other members to contribute.
Thank you. I think so. I'll break it down so you've got a clear understanding, the wider public has an understanding. So there was 17 councillors have drawn this in. So it's not just the Conservative group, but it's the bulk of all the Conservative group, as well as a Liberal Democrat and a non-aligned member. So we communicated with other groups, out with the administration, obviously within the council, as we put this together. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 and 9 was specifically from the Conservative group. 6, 7 and 8 came from the non-aligned group specifically, but was certainly supported by ourselves. So your two questions allude to the non-aligned member, so you can, well, I'll certainly cover that when it gets to that point. So predominantly, what brought it down to our radar was what was happening in the east of the region. So we've had single teacher primary schools, as we know, 10% of them across Dumfries and Galloway, which is 18 and below, have been there for a number of years. And what was brought to our attention was actually this budget saving that was made on the 28th of February past will have an impact on the school sizes from 25 and below. So in and above that, it would go from a 2-teacher school, which was normally 19 and above, 2-teacher school. So my own ward was Bykirk, first came to my attention, and it got wider because there was obviously Springfield, there was Johnson Bridge and Nethermill became very highly publicly aware of what was going on and had no idea this was coming, the impact. So they were going from a 2-teacher school, and they felt that for a single teacher to be running a 1-teacher school, a 25 composite class P1 through to 7 was inappropriate, and a large amount of risks attached to that. So we've highlighted some of the risks that were brought to our attention, particularly between 1 to 5. And we agree with a number of those risks. For instance, one of the risks we put in is, so at some points, we've been made aware that a teacher will work on their own and will be the only teacher in that school at that point in time. Not all the time, but at some point. So we understand as the protocols are that if in a circumstance where emergency happens, so say the teacher collapsed, fell ill, whatever it may be, 2 of the children, P1 to 7, are actually asked to phone the emergency services. Well, what are the risks attached to that? So that's one of the questions hopefully will get answered today. What risk assessments have been undertaken? And we're talking about not up to 18, but up to 25. So quite clearly. So across Dumfries and Galloway, what risk assessments, because this is a new policy. It's not a new policy, it's a policy that's actually been forced to be implemented, but maybe it should have been addressed a number of years ago, actually. It's been outstanding. So we're saying, okay, what the risk assessment and under due diligence, what are the methods, methodologies, working practices in place that would then cover that particular circumstances? What consideration has been taken of the wider or impacts that would have on a child's potential mental health, well-being, the wider class, so that they see a teacher collapse in front of them. If that teacher was to, if there was to be a loss of life for some reason, what wider impact does that have on the children? Do they feel responsible, so on and so forth? So that's the points that were getting put to us. So we thought, quite rightly, we should draw that to the council's attention. So that means certainly that was one of the drivers towards it, and there's another 4 points in particular that we've certainly laboured on when it comes to single teacher primary schools. That has been quite a movement since this was first brought to our attention, and since we first decided to put it down. We had it much earlier, ideally on the 25th of April, but because of Easter holidays and such like, we knew there was a resource issue. We didn't want to affect people's holiday time off, so on and so forth. So we still feel we're in plenty of time coming out today. Thursday would have been better for us. But so I think maybe just to get the actual debate going, what we'd like to see apply, and we'll move a motion as time goes on, is that we're quite clear we want to protect the single teacher, the potential 2-teacher primary schools going down to single teacher primary schools, particularly between the age range, the pupil roll number between 19 and 25. We think this will have a minimal effect on the council budget, positive effect on the communities, and we also put a level of resource in place that will actually help communities, parent councils, organisations like that will help them go forward and promote their own schools and make them more sustainable, vibrant as we go into the future. So we're not talking about large sums of money. We're not talking about policy change in real terms, because we know we need 2/3 of the council to do that in our current standing orders as they apply. What we're looking for is some form of mitigation to put in place to protect the currently 2-teacher schools that are under threat. I think there's only one at this moment it's actually dropped to, which is Springfield. So it would only apply to one. There was quite a number more than that when this first started. That would soften the impact over the next year in particular, this transitional period. Ultimately, that is our goal today. We do have concerns in regards to what Councillor Scobie's brought up. So we've got the additional supported learning, the additional supported needs. You've referenced that. I'll let Councillor Scobie react to that, and Councillor Justy if he wants to as well, because I know he supports that same stance. So from our perspective, that's our domineering, but we are open and willing to listen to any points of debate I put forward, and we do believe that there's funds available that we can tap into. And I'd like to say, to protect the reputation, I think, of the council, as well as the wider communities, like we've made quite clear, there's a small amount of money would also help mitigate this impact that was having. It is a devastating impact as far as I'm concerned. Later, happy to take any questions in regards to why we put it forward, what I've said there. But I do think, in regards to your two questions, Councillor Scobie would be better answering them.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Carruthers. I think, in terms of the risks and health and safety concerns about collapse and so on, those will have been assessed with regard to our current single-teacher schools. So it's not actually going to be any different in terms of the health and safety aspect of it, if it's 26 kids or if it's 19 kids, and in terms of that sort of lone working and so on. But I'll
Lydia, if you don't mind, because going back to the points we made, even by teachers, not necessarily employed by Dumfries and Galloway Council, they're saying up to 18, difficult enough. It goes beyond that, and a composite class, went to someone with 25 children, is completely different, especially with the potential complex learning needs with some of the children in there. That is a different feast. That's over a third more compared to what they've been dealing with. And sometimes it can be a school of maybe 8 or 10 kids. That's different to 25. And we had 5 in front of us who were sitting on the 24, 25 mark. This is the difference. That's why we're focusing on that. So, no, take on board what you're saying, but keen to hear what's being said.
I'd invite the Acting Director to respond.
Absolutely. We've had single teacher schools in Dumfries and Galloway for many years, and since 2012 all of our partner primary schools have actually had a non-class committed head teacher to add to that complement. So in a way, all of our smallest schools have a principal teacher and a non-class committed head teacher to add to that staffing. In terms of the risk assessments, and hand to John, operationally, who's very expert in this area.
I wouldn't use the word expert, however. The risk assessments that are provided for schools are template risk assessments, so they're well tried and tested, if you like, within schools that are already within a one-teacher sort of scenario. And using the example of Springfield for a number of years was a one-teacher school, so therefore there will be well-embedded risk assessments within that particular school. We provide the templates for schools. It sits on Glow, which is our intranet, so therefore the staff can get access to them. And then their task is to tailor them according to the individual needs of the different schools, because every school will have a different context. And part of that will be about when's the head teacher going to be there, when are other staff going to be there, when are visiting specialists going to be there, when is their parental engagement, volunteers, for example, in the school. So the risk assessments themselves will be tailored to the individual schools and will mitigate against the risks that you'd highlighted earlier on, Councillor Carruthers.
Councillor Carruthers?
Thanks, Lydia. So I suppose one of the considerations we had, so to better understand, because we haven't got that template in front of us, we haven't seen that. So, for example, my understanding is we haven't done it on 25, again, a single teacher on 25. So there is an increase of a third, like I'm saying, have explained previously. So, under the circumstances, what we said, what would the process be? What would be in place? What would that sort of risks and how would they be mitigated against? So we're quite clear and we understand what would happen. So a teacher did collapse, he was unconscious. A pupil, is it one pupil, is it two pupils? How does that react? If they're lone working at that moment in time, and it will be at times of the working day, that there is actually lone working going on. So I think I certainly need to understand, okay, what are the risks attached to that? I know we've got a process in place. What does that mean in real terms in regards to a 25 teacher school, even in compared to, say, an 18? Because I think there's a difference. It's 33% or so. Slightly is a higher capacity level of strain, you could say, or risk element to it because of the higher volume of children that's there. So I would like, if you don't mind later, I'd like that explained.
So again, the risks are according to what the capacity of the school is. It's according to the number of pupils. It's according to the amount of staff that are available. So the head teacher, in consultation with the principal teacher, will do those risk assessments according to what the context of the school actually is. and that will mitigate against things like if you have an increased class size, what would that look like? Who's got responsibility for what? So the children themselves will be part of that solution. The other staff members will be part of that solution. I myself was head teacher at Beatwick Primary School for a number of years, and again it was a small school. I was a teaching head teacher, and part of my responsibilities on a day-to-day basis was to ensure that I could mitigate against any risk to the children, whether that be playing in the playground, whether it was visitors coming to the school, whether the phone call took place. Part of that was all built into the programme with the children and the other adults within the school. So again, I can't give you a specific detail on what that would look like because every school will be different in terms of how they're going to mitigate against that.
Okay, Councillor Levy.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's been demonstrated, a lot of these questions, or all questions, could have been answered by the Conservative group and others meeting with officers to discuss this on a one-to-one basis. I don't really see the need for calling a full council meeting in order to do this, although I do suspect there might be a certain amount of political posturing behind it. Just to give, I think people need to be aware, and the general public need to be aware of the financial challenges which this council and others across the country are facing. Since austerity was introduced in 2010-11, we've had to make cuts of £96 million, which equates to 27% of the annual revenue budget. This year we're facing another £16 million of cuts, but by increasing the council tax by 4.8% and using the full health and social care additional funding offset, we still had to find 10.2 million. And to make this even worse, over the next 2 years, we're faced with finding another £33 million of savings, which takes us up to almost half the council budget will need to be saved. At the time of the budget setting, it has to be remembered there was only one budget presented. Councillor Scobie did have his own budget, which involved an increase of 18% in council tax. And I do wonder whether he actually went round consulting with the people of Wigtonshire and Dumfries and Galloway, how they would feel about having their council tax raised by £200 to £300 this year, and the following year, and the year after that, if he didn't want to make any cuts. It's very easy to just say, well, we'll increase council tax by these huge amounts, and that saves us having to make any decisions. Councillor Brodie, unfortunately, can't be here, but he sent out an email to all of us saying that what we should be doing is looking at introducing car parking fees, which we as an administration have always opposed. Introducing car parking fees, even at 50 pence an hour, means that someone on minimum wage working 40 hours a week in the town centre would have to find £1,000 a year in order to park their car, which would maybe absolutely depend on in order to get to work in the first place. And as for the Tories, obviously the Tories didn't bother tabling a budget for scrutiny, so they can accuse, or they can scrutinise ours to death, whereas we can't do anything for theirs, but we can speculate on what they may have had in their budget, whether they're going to go down the Scobie route of massive increases in council tax, or whether they're going to go down the Brodie route of introducing car parking fees, or whether they're going to go down the route which they had in their previous budget, whereby they proposed to slash Swestrans budget, which they were told by officers would lead to the collapse of public transport across our region, Dumfries and Galloway. We just don't know it. It all has to be speculation from thence. And I hope they do get around to publishing the budget next year. Now, personally, I would prefer not to make cuts in education or any other council budget, and I would rather pay Scandinavian rates of income tax and taxes in general and get Scandinavian levels of benefits, but unfortunately we aren't in that position. So I think if we have to make cuts, this has to be done on a fair and controlled basis. This has to be fair to all pupils in both urban and rural schools. As Appendix 3 shows, in urban schools where class sizes are higher, costs per pupil are lower, as opposed to rural schools where class sizes are smaller, but per capita costs are higher. As has been said, we currently have 10 single teacher schools, and I'm not aware of any safety issues having been identified within them. And it must be remembered that all single teacher schools are part of a larger partnerships with a non-teaching head teacher who can move resources as necessary. So in a binary, it's actually 1.5 staff, and a triple is 1.33. So it isn't just a single teacher school. And also the teacher in the single teacher school is recognised for the extra effort which would be required by being graded as a principal teacher, and as such is a very experienced teacher. And as has been said before, we've now been informed by the Scottish Government we've been allocated 108 probationer places, of which 67 are for primary schools, and obviously these can be used for mitigating any effects on the schools as is necessary. So what is proposed with regard to single teacher schools is to move to the nationally agreed threshold agreed by the teaching unions, the Scottish Government and COSLA to the 25 top limit. A further report on this is going to come to SIPL in July with more information on individual schools. And what I would propose is we agree to put on hold implementation of the Community Enablement Fund in case additional funding should be required to mitigate any effects if this is necessary. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Surtees.
Thank you very much, Leader. I just would like to say how delighted I am at the announcement just now about 108 probationers, which is higher than we had expected. And I think that's going to go a long way to just reinforce what Councillor Lever has said. Similar to Councillor Lever, I certainly didn't come into politics in order to make cuts like this to all of our services across the region. And I'm extremely concerned and sobered by the figures that Councillor Lever has outlined today about what we're facing in the future. I also just want to say that I went to a very important meeting yesterday in my ward, and that's Parents Against Cuts in Education, PACE. There was an excellent and healthy debate, and the passion and concern about the parents, from the parents, is real. There was a suggestion that it's called People Against Cuts in Education, and I think that their point that any cuts affects all people is really important. On the strength of the passion and concern that I heard yesterday, I would like just to ask the officers about reassurance as we go towards next year's budget regarding meaningful engagement and consultation. We do have a policy that has recently come forward about how to meaningfully engage with communities. And I'd just like to know if we could have a plan of action of how we communicate with schools, parents, teachers, as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Surtees. Just before I ask Gillian to answer that, I think that the criticism about the lack of consultation this year in this year's budget is correct, and we know why that happened. That happened because we expected, all of us, that the Transformation Board would come forward with a suite of possibilities from which the parties would be able to make choices, and unfortunately they only produced 2.5 million. Now we're looking at how we tackle that. We also want to look at how actually reforming the budget process itself, so that actually the budgets, not just the administration budget, but the budgets of the other groups are produced earlier and gives a chance then to consult with the public on those, and also for the groups to consult with each other to see if there are possibly areas of common agreement that can be taken forward. So we are doing work on that, and that I hope that we will never be in that position again, but I do hold my hands up and say and accept that there was insufficient consultation, but nobody did that deliberately. It happened because the transformation process didn't actually work out, and we're discussing elsewhere how that can be improved for future years. Councillor Davidson also wanted to contribute. Oh, sorry, Ross's question hasn't actually been answered yet. Sorry, Gillian.
Certainly, John and I have already set up a series of meetings and work streams with head teachers with regards to sharing the information and looking at ideas and proposals for next year to make sure our head teachers are key in this process, and in working with them and with our parent carer, Dumfries and Galloway Forum, we can make sure that the messages either to or from the budget can be fully shared.
Councillor Surtees?
Can I just, thank you very much for that, Gillian. Can I just confirm that we will be keeping the policy of community engagement and consultation at the heart of as we proceed?
Absolutely, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. No, Councillor Davidson.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader. Yes, I listened very carefully to Councillor Crothers, because I think it's important that we're examining both what's been set out here today and also what we do next on the basis of fact and evidence. We talk about devastating impact of measures that won't be implemented until August. Now, I'm quite willing to accept that there can be drafting errors when people are working under pressure. But I think we need to be just a little bit careful about what impact we actually consider is likely to be had. And we've already heard that risk assessment naturally has to be bespoke and tailored to the individual school in question. That stands to reason. Our wards are different. The areas within our wards are different each to another. All of our small primary schools are different each to another. All of their arrangements will necessarily be bespoke and distinct depending on their local circumstances. It's exactly, I think, as we would all expect. Now, I'm not quite sure where we have got to in terms of Councillor Crothers' group's policy position on small schools. Now, of course, in the past they have opposed the proposed closure of small schools. It was an honourable position, and I think they were right to do so. One of those schools was in my own ward. But some of the concerns that are being raised in what has been outlined here are surely, as we've already heard, common to all small schools and have to be addressed and mitigated as part of everything that we expect head teachers and principal teachers to do as part of their job. Which leads me then to the negotiation of the national limit. It's set at 25. It's not a matter of imposition, it's a tripartite negotiation. Representatives of the teaching profession must have considered that as part of their position going into negotiations when that limit was set, and were content that it was set. At least I assume that they were content that it was set. I have looked back and tried to understand whether there was an issue or problem with that at the time. Perhaps my research hasn't gone back far enough, but I am not aware, and I stand to be corrected if that is the case. And again, facts and evidence I think would be beneficial in this place, but I am not aware that it was a fundamental concern when that was set. I wish to be enlightened as to the specific problems that an increase of 6 children will create under these circumstances. That has not been made clear to me at this point. I have yet to see where that is a specific cause for great operational problems, for particular difficulties, for an impact on teaching and learning. These are all things that I think we would like to hear. Perhaps this can be brought forward so that we can examine it and scrutinise it further. I think Councillor Lever makes a very good point. We have already arranged and agreed that there will be a report to a SIPO committee in June, I think he said. And I would absolutely like to see that based on facts and evidence so that we can understand exactly whether there are any issues that we need to deal with, whether those issues have to be associated with resources that we have to find and apply to the problems in order to make sure they're mitigated and dealt with. Because one thing that I think we all can commonly agree on is that we want to educate children in the best possible manner that we can within the resources that we have. So I'm very happy to second his proposal that we hold off on the decisions of the on criteria for the Community Initiatives Enablement Fund until we've heard the results of, until we see the results of that report at SIPO. We can then look at arriving at a collective view on whether resources from that need to be applied to what has been set out for us at SIPO committee, or whether they are in fact matters that can be dealt with as part of the ordinary running of the schools as part of the terms and conditions nationally negotiated and agreed. But I do think it's a sensible way forward. I think it's very important that we listen. I also think it's very important that we do so on the basis of facts and evidence. I hope to hear more of those coming forward today. I certainly look forward to them coming forward in June.
You can.
With clarification of what he was seconding, what was being seconded.
No, absolutely not. With your leave, Leader, I was seconding the suggestion made by Councillor Lever, which was specific to one line in the budget. I regard it as a matter of timing rather than a fundamental change to the budget at this point. I think, if I have understood him correctly, he suggests that we do not set the criteria for what is at the moment known as the Community Initiatives Enabling Fund until we have had a chance to examine the report at SIPO committee. If that report highlights that there is a need for additional resource, then we can revisit, by the established manner that we can revisit these things, presumably through a meeting of full council, allocating that money to address pressures that have been identified through that report in June. If I've understood Councillor Lever correctly.
Councillor Hislop.
Chair, I may be wrong in what I've just heard, but what we're saying is we're stopping the Community Enablement Fund just now because the budget we put forward in February doesn't add up, and we need to make sure we've got mitigation in there. We've already heard that there was 560 odd thousand for teacher realignment in primary schools. That's went down to one teacher, which is a 50,000 saving. That doesn't add up. There's 450 missing, 500,000 missing.
I think you've misunderstood what the proposal is. You've misunderstood. There's a community enablement fund of 85k. We're not talking about reversing a decision of the council. It's as if things become apparent at the meeting of SIPL in June that there are other things which need to be done in order to facilitate the decisions that have been made, that there is a fund that is available without drawing on reserves, or that fund, that 285,000 won't have been spent and therefore could be made available if there were certain things that needed to be done to mitigate the introduction of these changes. Because some things might be different, if something comes to light, that the work hasn't been done yet, the work is being undertaken in terms of what mitigation might be needed. We don't even know if it will be needed, but what mitigation might be needed, and it will mean that a certain amount of money is available should those measures need to be taken. It is not saying that the budget didn't add up, because the budget did add up.
Leader, I hadn't finished, so can I, just on the back of your interruption to my point, can I ask then, of the 563,000 that was primary allocation, is that still in place? And is the mitigation that has been described to cover any shortfall in that? Or is that full 563,000 reduction in primary staffing going to actually take place?
Well, the intention would be that it did take place, but there might be measures which need to be taken in order to alleviate certain aspects of that if it turns out that there are things, for example, on ESN or whatever, that there's some additional input required while the changes are being taken place for support for learners, for example. But I can pass over to Gillian, who may be able to answer the question more.
Certainly, that the consistent class size statement did not just relate to our smallest schools. We were looking to ensure that the implementation of class sizes was across all of our schools to make sure that we were in keeping. So it was simply, it affected 4 of our small one-teacher schools, but it also affects our larger schools who have got 33 pupils or 25 pupils, and it's making sure that all of those classes are at optimal, efficient capacity, and that will be implemented.
And I think, am I right in saying that one of the concerns of parents was what happens if the school roll falls below 26 during the school year? Because obviously that would be extremely disruptive to pupils if they had to be recomposited into a single class school. And I think we would hope, for example, to be able to mitigate something like that.
We certainly know that head teachers value stability. It helps them to plan. It helps the class teachers to plan. We have always reserved the right to change the class composition throughout the year and use our resources to best effect. And we could mitigate to provide that stability, should that be what you wished us to do.
Councillor Dryburgh?
So thanks very much, Chair. I was a bit concerned about that last question because Councillor Hislop was actually challenging the potential for mitigation that his leader just asked for. So it's a weird one. Anyway, can I just, obviously the discussion of that the opposition leader, as he came, we mentioned Springfield a few times, and as part of that sort of oration, he did quite rightly mention risk assessments about, the opportunities for these areas. And obviously Springfield is part of a dual cluster school. It has one teacher and the opportunity for the head teacher to come along as well. But I think the risk assessment here is really important with regards with children for additional support needs. And we know, for instance, in Springfield next year there is going to be quite a high demand child going to be there. And as part of that risk assessment, again, it's just to get the clarity, Chair, about this. if there is a high demand child within that school, then there has to be a second person there. Is that correct?
Certainly, if a child requires additional support, that support will be put in place. The framework for support has not changed, and if a child has additional needs, then those needs will be met within that school.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Leader. I'm actually quite happy, I think, with one of the suggestions that's coming forward, if I'm picking it up correctly, and this is like additional support of the 275,000 from the Community Initiative funding. This has happened in the past. This type of mitigation has happened in the past, and it's been quite successful. But I think there is still a lot of concerns out there. You know, you can look at every school, every small school is different. It's an individual, it have different needs. So I think part of the concerns in the communities and the schools is taking that into account, and I think a lot of it's communication as well, and actually what's going to happen in schools, and decisions being taken then reversed. And we mentioned about what happens if numbers go down, then it'll be the following year that you get the teacher taken away. But what happens if it goes up? The following year, so you've got a 1-2 and 2-1, so you've no consistency of teaching within them schools. So, and that affects a broad number of pupils from 1 to 7. You know, so them are the kind of concerns that have been coming across to me as well. I know there is, I think Jeff mentioned a report coming to education, and I think a lot of detail was in that. What I would, and I actually put it forward, but I can't remember all the detail within that, but the detail within this motion, if there's anything missing in that, is there anything that could probably be brought up to education for that further detail and scrutiny from this motion from Councillor Crothers? If there's anything that's missing, I don't see anything wrong with that. If there's any further information that can be put forward to make for members to look at. I think, with the 275, I would have liked more. I understand about the constraints of the budgets. And if councils had gotten a fair settlement over the years, perhaps we wouldn't be having this discussion now. But unfortunately, we are where we are with the money we get from councils. But I think the main thing that I'm concerned about is the pupils and the individuals within small communities, and the clarity of what's happening and the consistency of teaching and for everybody. And this is where the gift effect comes in. But if I've got it right on that community initiative enabling funding, I'm happy with that as a start.
I think you make a good point about schools which are sort of on the cusp, where 1 year they might be at having 2 teachers, and then the next year they fall back to down 1, and then they go back up again. I think that could be very unsettling, and that's a type of situation I think that probably we look to have some sort of mitigation in the longer term. Obviously that wouldn't just be about a 1 year settlement, but we would really need to sort of address how that was dealt with.
Yes, if I can pick up on that point, Leader. Absolutely. The question I think was posed by Councillor Nicholson was if the school roll does go up, if the number of children who come into the school increases, that the number of classes required in that would happen. We have a policy which is based on the next available break, if that makes sense, so that we're not disrupting through a term time. They would obviously be catchment children, and if the catchment children were arrived in a catchment, then we would obviously mitigate and make sure that we're able to provide the resources, the teaching resources to provide for that. Just picking up on the Leader's point as well there, a lot of our schools, because they're small schools, tend to be on the cusp of numbers. So, for example, a small school of 48, 49 children, again, there's the opportunity for a family potentially to move in, or indeed if they're at 52, a family to move out. And that's the way it operates. And again, that policy supports all of those schools in terms of making sure that they have the correct ratio, the 1 to 25, to ensure that we're not breaking any rules of the game here, so that every school does get what they're entitled to. But again, we would reserve the right that would only be catchment children would be allowed into a school if that was going to, as we describe it, burst the bubble to ensure that they required another teacher. So whether that's a 2 to a 3 or a 4 to a 5 or indeed a 7 to an 8 teacher school, that's the way we would manage that. There was a question also raised, I think, regarding the potential disruption to the children's learning between moving between 1 and 2 teachers, or as I said before, 2 or 3 teachers. All of our schools do have very effective tracking and monitoring systems, so therefore they are tracking the children's progress. There should be no negative impact as the children move from class to class, and indeed that is the same as they move into the secondary part of their learning journeys. We do have tracking and monitoring, which is an effective process, and again that's worked within schools, partnerships and indeed clusters to ensure that the children are being monitored as they progress through their learning journeys in our schools. Another question I think was raised within the question, which was regarding the sort of, not necessarily the mitigation, but what I can say is I've been working with the head teachers who have potentially been affected by this decision. And it's an interesting piece of work that we're doing, because every school, every head teacher that I've met with, and we've met together as a collective, but I'm also trying to work with them on an individual basis, every solution to try and provide for them is different, whereas some would appreciate an additional member of staff, such as a probationer teacher. Others, it doesn't work for them, therefore they're looking at something different in terms of trying to provide stability for their schools. Gillian's alluded to that. That is the key concern for them, is to try and even the bumps out a little bit on the way, and we are committed to doing that as a service to try and ensure that we are providing the best for our children.
Thanks. Councillor Ferguson.
It's been asked and answered. Thanks, Leader.
Thanks. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you. Well, some people may remember that in fact, I know that somebody in the audience knows perfectly well that I'm here because of small schools in the first instance. I want to ask about 3 things. The first issue is the tripartite issue. It might well have been agreed about the numbers of children going into a composite class, but I'm not absolutely certain whether they talked about age groups, so I'd like some clarity on that, whether that was actually part and parcel of the case. The second issue I want to make a mention of is fairness. I think that parents will want to know exactly how you're coming to the arrangements that you're proposing to do. There's a danger that this is going to look like a fudge. And the one thing that people hate is a fudge. They want to know about fairness. They want to know how policies are applied. They want to be able to see that School A in the west of the region is being treated in the same way as School B in the east and School C in the central part. So I would urge members, if you come to a decision about what you're going to do and be clear, then you should actually hang on to that. Not have a muddle halfway through, because I have no idea what's being proposed, from what fund and why, and this is just kicking the ball, frankly, down the road, I think. Far from it being clarity, I think it's not. I think it's actually really rather opaque. And I think that the members of the public, who, although they might not like what is being proposed, if it is explained to them all the risks that are concerned and about how you mitigate, particularly with respect to having a principal teacher in a single school, with the additional support of a non-teaching head through the cluster, which, let me tell you, was not the case 10, 12, 15 years ago. That's been considerably beefed up in terms of input. I think you have a danger of going slightly wrong.
Can I just maybe add a bit of clarity to the Community Initiatives Enablement Fund? That was a new fund. It hasn't been brought in yet. So it's not a question of anybody losing out from it. It was an allocation of money which hadn't been spent and was allocated in the budget to look at ways in which you could assist communities develop, either for community asset transfer or social enterprises and so on. So nobody's actually had it yet. So we're not taking away anything that anybody has had experience of. The decision as to whether or not it needs to be used will be made once the analysis has been made and presented to the Civil Committee in July. We don't have sufficient analysis at the moment to be able to give that degree of clarity. Now, I would say on the fund, we were keen on the idea of fund. I haven't actually lost enthusiasm for the fund. I think there may be another mechanism of obtaining this sort of support, and that is through SOCEP. Now, so I would propose, I haven't actually worked anything up on this at the moment, but what I would propose if that fund does need to be used is that we work with Scottish Borders to prepare some sort of alternative proposal to put to SOCEP. They have £10 million from the Scottish Government, 7 million in capital, 3 million in revenue, and that we could put a proposal to SOCEP maybe to get that type of support. I would think for across the south of Scotland, because I would imagine that it would be of assistance in the Borders as much as it is in Dumfries and Galloway. So it's a question of looking at an alternative way of doing that if this £285,000 is needed in order to provide mitigation for the changes that have been brought in. Is there anything further you wanted to say?
Just to confirm Appendix 2, I think the question was raised with regards to the age categories for the composite. Appendix 2 is a direct lift from the tripartite agreement, the SNCT website. So whether it is a primary 1-2 or a primary 1-4 or a 1-7, a composite class is a composite class.
Thank you. Councillor Sloan.
Thanks, Chair. I was listening to what the chair of SIPL was saying earlier on, and he talked about, he took us back 10 years to when these cuts actually started. Well, the massive cuts actually started. In that time of nearly £100,000 worth of cuts, £100 million worth of cuts in that time. Also during that time we had a 10-year freeze in the council tax, where we were not permitted by the Scottish Government to increase our council tax to help deliver our services. Now there's one common denominator in that, and that's the SNP government. You know, so don't let us all sit around this table as if we are to blame for this, because we're not to blame for it. The Scottish Government's to blame for this. I was disappointed to hear the motion and the second because I was of the opinion that we were going to put all educational cuts on hold until a review would take place and we would meet again before, I think it was August was set. That does not seem to be the case now, and that obviously makes things more difficult.
Thank you. Councillor Karen Carruthers.
Hi, thanks, Leader. I am concerned in regards to Springfield, which appears to be the only small school now that's going to be infected by the one teacher school. The reason that I am concerned is that the school roll is currently 21, but it's also holding school for 3 kids which currently go to Kirkpatrick Fleming. Kirkpatrick Fleming is at capacity. It may still be at capacity come summer, the new term. Gretna is also massive concern. It's again at nearly at capacity. The amount of units that's being developed there, is going to pose a major problem to Gretna. I would like to see Gretna taken out of this equation at this moment in time, put a hold on it, give a bit of stability for a year, allow a proper review to them 3 schools, because at the end of the day, the 2 of them are cluster schools, Kirkpatrick Fleming and Springfield, to have a proper review. There's also a house that's just recently been sold. We think there's a family coming into that. So I would like to see the one school now that has actually been left being taken out of this, given a year's reprieve to allow a bit of stability, to have that review provided. The other point Councillor Dryborough did make is in regards to additional support learning. My understanding is if a child needs that additional support learning, it is for that child. It is not for that teacher to be there for the rest of the school. It is for that one person. And my other concern is in regards to the consultation, or the lack of consultation. And in 3.8 it does actually state that during March and April officers met with parent councils collectively and individually. In what format did that take place? Did officers contact each parent council who was going to be affected by this decision, and have they actually met with all the parent councils, Springfield included, to go through concerns? I know there was a frequently questions and answers. That's totally different to actually having that opportunity to sit with officers and have their concerns answered.
Thank you. If I take the final point first, certainly we have met with any parent council that wished to meet with us, either myself or John or the parental engagement officer. So some schools came together and asked to meet with us together, and some schools wanted to meet with us either just as a parent council or the wider parent forum, and we have tried to attend or to meet with them in whatever format they chose. And we've also worked closely with our chair of our Dumfries and Galloway Parent Carer Forum, who also presented a parent's view, parent's perspective of the budget savings. So certainly we've tried to respond to any concerns from parent councils. We could always do more, and certainly we will continue to work with parent councils if they want further information.
I mean, just picking up on Councillor Surtees' point, I mean, I think consultation is key to everything, because I think speaking to people can alleviate a lot of concerns. I don't always think it's good for parent councils. Sometimes they don't know who to contact to set up a meeting. So I think we should be a lot more proactive rather than reactive in cases like this. But I still go back to my point. I think Springfield, at the end of the day, the cuts that were proposed was a budget saving of 500,000. We've got one school left now. So I think I would like a year's reprieve to allow that to be looked at.
The other money, though, is not. It wasn't just bringing the single teacher schools down. It was actually other adjustments in other schools as well. So it's not just the single. Obviously, it's most obvious for the single teacher schools, because that makes a bigger difference to the compositing. But the bulk of the saving is not actually the single teacher school. I think also that there were proposals to look at the catchment at Springfield as well, are there not?
I think, Chair, that's why I would like, or Leader, sorry, I would like it to be put on hold for a year. I think there's major concerns down in this with this cluster and with Gretna. I mean, it is major, and we need to look at something. So I would like leave it as status quo, have a proper review, whether a catchment review, whatever, and then revisit if needed.
A catchment review takes time. As you'll understand, it's a part of a statutory consultation process, but we can certainly look at that. I do recognise that Gretna Primary School is a popular school. Not all the pupils who live in the Springfield catchment attend Springfield School. Some of them choose to go elsewhere, and we try and abide by parental choice where we can. But if members would like us to undertake a catchment review of that area, we certainly can do so.
Okay, I think that's possibly something that should be decided.
That's fine. Just on the other hand as well, there's also 7 children that are currently going to Springfield School from Gretna, so it's vice versa. They're constantly jumping about, so I think it's really important that we need a look at this before making changes.
Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. Could I perhaps address the remarks made in my name by Councillor Lever? And I would sum it up by saying I find it a bit rich coming from a Labour councillor trying to defend 10 years of SNP council tax freeze. I find it immensely rich coming from that, And if you take into consideration, I don't hide for the fact that I put a budget forward, a budget proposal that recognised an 18% increase, because that would have then reflected the monies that we'd lost going back over those 10 years. So it does, and I see him shaking his head there. Because if you go back to 2005, 6, 7 time, I will remember moving within the Labour group for a 15% increase, and that was to stop the cuts then. But unfortunately, I lost then in favour of a 3%, which was ridiculous. But that was the case then, going back all those years, and I lost within the Labour group to that one, as I did when I moved for the 18% and no cuts. So again, I find it rich coming from Councillor Surtees that she did not come into politics to make cuts. Well, there was an opportunity for all of you to second the 18% cut, and I didn't see one of you charging over the hill, and that would have stopped the cuts that we're facing just now. So it would have. So, in that respect, I think that the Labour group going back to 2000 and the mover then, and I'm sure Sean could speak to that ad nauseum on his 3%, but nevertheless we did affect it, and that is how it came about. So, turning to the actual requisite and the issues raised by the leader of the Conservative. Yeah, there's been risk, and we've heard the responses to all the risk assessment that has been carried out. But the biggest risk that this council faces is if parents vote with their feet. And we have seen it if the deputy leader's looking for evidence and fact. We saw it going back to a small school west of the region where the parents voted with their feet, and it was the parents who closed the school. And this may be the same situation where a parent may not like and the disadvantages of having one teacher, notwithstanding what has been offered as a solution in terms of a non-teaching head being available. If parents don't like the idea that their child is being taught from the age of 5 or younger right through to 11 by the one teacher, and that puts the school at risk of closure. So that's a big risk. And how do you assess that situation? Coming to item 6 and your questions, Chair, on with child autism on the increase. It's a known fact that it's continually increasing. I see you shaking your head now.
It's the diagnosis that's on the increase. It's the diagnosis that's on the increase, and that's a good thing.
Chair, I give way to your interruption there, and I think that I have had the meetings with the acting Director of Education, and on her figures, then we are facing a third of pupils across Dumfries and Galloway who is either diagnosed with autism or in need of some additional support needs, and those are categorised. And the acting director qualified that it's not 1, 2, 3, 4 now, but it is on a target basis. And my fear in this one with the 563, and I've not been satisfied with the answers I've been given, and I've raised it in an area committee as well, in terms of the massive cut of £706,000 out of the additional supports for need, and the reconfiguration will not meet the needs of the children who require that additional support needs, and therefore I would hope that we will reverse that particular cut. Only this week I attended a school west of the region where a parent was totally dissatisfied with the fact that she was finding it difficult to get her child to go to school because of anxiety and the need for that. And there are many more children in similar situations. Regarding your reference to standing the principles of GAFEC, I think we've got to get it right for every child. And that is a principle that I hope that we all sign up to, and that we should be looking to deliver it for every child, because every child is an individual, and we've got to get it right for every child. And I don't think the cuts that we have agreed this year in the budget are going to get it right for every child. Because if we look at the inclusion and a document as presented by the EIS, where the increase in abusive and violent behaviour will lead to exclusion, in my opinion, because there is not enough additional support for the teacher within these classrooms, and therefore we will be looking to perhaps redirect or alternative provision for these children. And in the case of west of the region, that could be 25 miles away to the learning centre, and that is totally unacceptable. Again, the per capita school budget reduced, the move away from 3 and 5 days to in primary and secondary to 5 and 12. I think, in any head teacher I've spoken to, that will cause problems in trying to find replacement, doubling up of classrooms well beyond the 25. So in that respect, Chair, and many others, I don't think that's a satisfactory position. On your basis that you've already admitted or come to the conclusion that the consultation was wrong, I think that was based on a consultation simulator where we had 710 or thereabouts responses. Well, PACE, they did put out a petition, and they have got, in the short time, a lot shorter than the consultation period of the council, they got 752. So if we're going to take cognizance of the 700 and odd on the simulator, then I would hope that this council will take cognizance of the 752, which was an increase, and their expectations of what they want to see delivered by way of education. Because I do believe education does matter within the small schools and the across the board. So in that respect, Chair, I will be moving that we do look at how we can mitigate these by the use of the reserves and the change fund when we get to the end.
Okay, I wonder, Acting Director, there are issues that maybe I can understand why there's worries around the ASN part. I mean, it's obviously something that we want to look at, and it's something that we've in looking at the transformation programme coming up, that was one of the things that we would want to tackle fairly early. But maybe you can say a bit about that, because I can understand why people have a concern when they see those figures.
Thank you. And I have confirmed that around 6,000 children are currently on the matrix for the framework for support, so that is around a third of our role. But only a small number of those require specialist, targeted or multi-agency support. The vast majority of the children who require additional support, as John highlighted, are through the normal tracking and monitoring arrangements of our experienced and expert teachers. Their needs can be met within the classroom with some additional support or some additional monitoring. So really, the third of our children requiring additional support is not a sense of extra bodies being required in the classroom. I do recognise, and it's set out in paragraph 3.1.12, that our schools are always looking for more direct support for learning. And we have had the opportunity to refocus our supporting learning service to focus on the areas of greatest pressure. And we know that those are looked after children, children with social communication needs, which includes autism as a subset of that, support to manage challenging behaviour, as Councillor Scobie highlighted, and statutory attendance and exclusion. Those are our areas of priority. Those are the areas that we will focus our supporting learner service on. And the removal, as set out in paragraph 313, the removal of the Aber-Lauer service is about promoting inclusion in our service rather than looking at our children being out of school and providing through off-site provision. We're looking at providing our services within schools in bespoke basis and delivering this on behalf of our head teachers.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, Chair, if I could come back, and I'm grateful for the Acting Director of Education for Gillian's information, and it was Gillian that provided the further pupils. And it may be correct to say that not all of those 6,000 children require one-to-one or whatever, but they will require some form of additional support, whether it's through, and Gillian covered it there, by monitoring, whatever. So the fear of the parents that have expressed to me is that the teacher's time will be concentrated there while they will not be concentrated on the rest of the classroom. So in that respect, notwithstanding what Gillian has provided by way of an explanation, that we still have 6,000 kids who require that. And my big fear is here, and I've said it in a number of full council meetings and other places, is that this council then runs the risk of someone taking out a legal challenge and saying that we are not delivering the additional support that is required, and indeed may need to go to a judicial review, but they can take it to the Special Needs Educational Tribunal, where the success rate is running at 90%. Of parents applying. So that's the risk this council runs in the cuts that they're making just now.
Okay, Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Leader. Thanks for letting me back in. A couple of points you said, I will formally move a motion. Maybe we start to move the business on, but first obviously thank the administration for identifying a fund where money can be applied, being the Community Initiatives Enabling Fund. That was very good of his. Second point, I think, in regards to Councillor Mayton picked up on it, and I think Councillor Davison did as well, is that when you look at paragraph 2.9, which goes on about class size maxima, and you look at the Appendix 2 on page 19, it gives you the two tables. So the two tables in regards to that, so you've got primaries and then you've got secondaries. Now, in the secondaries it talks about 20 in practical classes. Now, what I see hasn't been taken into consideration by the organisations that looked at that is actually, okay, at least I'm saying 30% of the working week for kids that are on primary school kids, that is on practical classes, practical exercises, no consideration of that whatsoever in regards to that. And that clearly outlines there's 20 pupils maximum in secondary, but there's no recognition whatsoever in primaries in regards to that. But at least 30% of their working week is on practical, like ICT, art, so on and so forth. So I think that is a fair point that was raised by Councillor Maitland, and obviously clear evidence that actually maybe that should have been recognised. Maybe it was discussed, I don't know, but we could certainly recognise that as a way forward. The Conservative group purposely have not politicised this at all, going back to what Councillor Lever said. We've made no, but I'll give you a wee example though. So, as part of the Twitter feed for one of the South of Scotland MSPs, Joan McAlpine, SNP MSP, this move is tantamount to a death sentence to schools most affected by this, effectively closure via the back door. That's your own political parties that are aligned to you. We want cross-party support to try and achieve something today. We purposely have not went political with this. We could quite have easily done this, opportunities there, but we haven't. We've just been clear and factual in regards to our statements. So I will formally move a motion in regards to, maybe in addition to what's said, but just depending, and I wonder, Leader, in regards to, there is funds that have been identified. We don't know the exact figures, because when we got the report on Friday, obviously there was a bank holiday yesterday, we weren't able to access that level of information, but we have identified, obviously through yourselves, it could be the change fund or even reserves for that matter, but we do think there's a way forward in regards to it, particularly primary schools, but obviously there'll be other motions that come forward. Single teacher primary schools, that is, above 19. So we're asking to agree that the Dumfries and Galloway Council apply a sufficient level of resource from whatever fund is available. It could be the change fund, the community initiatives enabling fund, or even reserves for that matter, but we could maybe have a discussion about that. That allows the primary schools with a roll of 19 and over to continue for the upcoming year as two teacher schools whilst entering this transitional period, allowing for parents, teachers, parent councils, etc. to prepare for any mitigation measures, including catchment reviews that can be applied to help the local schools become a sustainable and vibrant school. We can certainly get this in writing. So, and what we mean by that, so we're absolutely clear, so they retain their over 26 and above. We're looking for them to retain that, be two teacher schools. That's certainly a positive impact in our sustainability of our schools. So we don't know exactly what that figure is. Maybe we could have an adjournment for 15 minutes and have a discussion about that. So there's a second part as well, because we do think looking at transformation, we've obviously spoken that the big decisions are still to be made. So we do think, and going partway towards addressing that, give the Transformation Board a clear understanding of what the Council thinks. So we agree that as part of the transformational process, consideration is given to the impacts the future predicted savings being imposed in the Council will have on the delivery of our educational model, including a full public consultation on the budget proposals being put forward by the administration of Dumfries and Galloway Council. We should also consider that. We can get this printed out for you, later, so we can all see, but I would formally move that, and my understanding is that's the first one that's been formally moved.
We also had a proposal from Councillor Lever, and it was seconded by Councillor Davids.
I don't think it was moved and seconded, Leader.
It was moved and seconded by Councillor Davids.
What was it then? What was it then? That's the thing, because that's quite clear. It was questions asked, clarity, we never got any.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Leader. I think I always welcome the opportunity to discuss education at full council. It is the most important thing that our council invests in. I don't see it as a budget. I don't see it as money being spent. It is an investment in our future, essentially. We all went to school. Councils and governments paid for that funding at the time as an investment, and here we all are today. I think there's been a number of things said, people not making it political, people making it political, but the thing is that it's political decisions that have led us to this council facing huge cuts. They come from many different places, and I'm not going to rehearse those arguments today. But the reality is that we have these cuts to make because they're being enforced on us by other bodies, various governments, and that is the reality we're in. And I think that we had a very positive outcome at Policy and Resources in January, where every council in Policy and Resources agreed that the cuts that were being imposed on us by the Scottish Government were not in the interest of people in Dumfries and Galloway. We agreed to lobby the Scottish Government and for the leader to do that on the council's behalf. And this is the outcome today, because essentially the Scottish Government did not listen to the united voice of councillors in January. And that's why we're at this juncture today, because I would happily rip up every cut to education if the money was there to do so. Unfortunately, as the Conservatives have pointed out and other councillors have pointed out, there are more cuts to come because they are being imposed on us by governments elsewhere in Scotland and the UK as a result of austerity, and that is the juncture we're in. That's my tuppence worth, but I would just like to seek governance advice on Councillor Curtis's motion. I note that he had said about resources, but I mean, there's no allocation. Where are those resources coming from? And I would like to know if it's a competent motion based on the word resources.
Yes, sir.
Just to start off with, well, the only thing I would like to come back, because it wasn't wholly accurate what Adam said there. So with respect to Adam, I did mention 3 funds: Community Initiatives Enabling Fund, Change Fund, and Reserves for that matter. So I mean, it may well, I may not answer the question, but I would like an adjournment in regards to just have that offline discussion with the Section 95 officer.
Yeah, I think we need an adjournment anyway, but I wondered if Councillor Lever, you could repeat what you'd said earlier in terms of our proposal, or your proposal.
Fundamentally, it was agreed to put on hold the implementation of the Community Enablement Fund to allow any mitigation to be identified should it be needed.
And that was seconded by Councillor Davidson. Sorry, Councillor McKee had wanted to speak and I hadn't called in. Apologies.
Thanks, Chair. It's just this issue of parental choice and what schools their kids can go to and that sort of thing. That makes it difficult for officers to make decisions on what should be a 1-teacher and a 2-teacher school if they're close in numbers, where parents tend to take their kids to schools where it suits them, and I appreciate that because the family has done it themselves. They take them to schools where it's handier for them to pick them up after hours, drop them off in the morning, pick them up at night, and that's not necessarily the school that's the catchment area they live within. So that's a difficulty that the officers have got to be able to address, and I would hope the parents recognise that that is an issue for us. There was a primary school recently in the last 2 or 3 years where we were going to discuss closure of it, and the parents were taking their kids to other schools, and all of a sudden the parents dropped their kids off at that school, so we didn't need to close that school. And that's the sort of problems that we've got, and I would hope that the public recognise that as well.
Councillor Scobie, did you have an alternative proposal you wanted to make?
Yeah, as an amendment, Chair, I would move that with the use of £1 million in the Change Fund and 1.461 million from the Council Reserves, the education cuts can be achieved, and I've got a list there. And once I've, because there are amendments, I did give Fiona earlier, but I'll make those amendments if there's an adjournment, so that everybody has it before them. So I would move that we do.
Do you have a seconder for you? Do you have a seconder?
You want me to say it again?
No, I said, do you have a seconder? Councillor Juicy. Okay, so we now have three motions. Councillor McGregor.
Sorry, Leader, it's just a very brief question in respect of Councillor Lever's motion. What, in reference to the mitigation may be needed? Mitigation may be needed in respect of what?
Should it be needed? Should it be needed to reduce the impact?
Okay, reduce the impact of what? Let me be be very clear. Councillor Wilson's absolutely right. We've all had to make really tough budget decisions this year, and there's no point throwing blame at anybody. We are where we are. I made it very clear on budget day that we did have additional funding available to mitigate some of the savings that were being proposed that particular day. They're called policy development, and it was argued black by the leader that we couldn't utilise those on a one-off basis to mitigate some of the savings that we were looking at. And yet today, the Community Enablement Fund, which sat within policy development, is now being proposed. Now, I suspect that Community Enablement Fund was never required in the first place, should never have been proposed as a policy development, and should have been maintained as part of our general fund balances to help to continue to deliver the education we should. So I would like to know what that fund would be used to mitigate against specifically.
Councillor McGregor, can I just interject that what I said at the time is that we didn't use, that we didn't use the balances because of non-recurrent for recurrent expenditure, and that was a very firm advice given by our head of finance that we shouldn't be doing that. Not that you couldn't use it for other things, of course you can, but that's a one-off fund. It won't be able to fund additional salaries. Once it's spent, and therefore you spend it on something you only need to spend it on once.
Leader, with respect, there's no point in us going back over this. I was correct on the day and I'm correct today.
That's your opinion, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Carruthers.
No, just come back. So I took the opportunity to take advice in regards to governance and the competence of the motion that was put forward. So I took that on board and we're to be explicit. So I've been explicit. So that point that was being raised by Councillor McGregor is absolutely correct. Whether we address that now or after the adjournment, different thing. Maybe get a chance to work on something, but we have to be absolutely clear. We've been absolutely clear where we want that money to go. We just haven't got the exact figure yet. We're not sure. So we will have that debate through the adjournment, but we think we are absolutely clear it's in regards to the mitigation towards against the softening of the impact it's having in regards to single teacher schools. So that will ultimately fund teachers. So that whether we address it now, Leader, or whether we address it after the adjournment, it needs to be addressed.
Okay, Councillor James.
Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, I think there's been a move for an adjournment and under 10.2.10, and that should be taken immediately.
Well, I'm quite prepared to have an adjournment, but there are a number of members who want to contribute. Prior to the adjournment, there will be an adjournment, and there also are three motions there for consideration, but there are people who want to express their view, and I think they have the right to express their view. Councillor James.
Well, it's right. It's not been seconded until it's seconded. Procedural picks in at that point, so we'd have to adjourn at that point, but it's not been seconded yet, but I think it's fair comment.
Okay, Councillor James.
Thank you. I can speak before or after the adjournment, but you're going to give me a go now. I'm enjoying my new position as an independent observer of proceedings, and there have been a couple of good contributions. I was a bit confused about it from Councillor Lever. He seems to be pro-Scandi taxes, but against Scobie taxes. Is that right? And Councillor Scobie actually pointed out Scobie pointed out that the fault lies with ultimately with the SNP, or even beyond that, I would say, with the fact we have Holyrood. Because had we not had Holyrood, we could have powers here locally to decide 0% increases in council tax, cuts in council tax, or 20% increases in council tax. If we felt the will, we could do that. So I hope one day he's going to join me and call for the abolishment of Holyrood. Parents voting with their feet is absolutely correct there. That is the thing, because we are a rural constituency, a rural region, and when I look at our old maps, it's amazing how many schools we have, and you read back in the 1880s, villages would have 800 people, and today they have 150, and it's a retrenchment back to the city's consolidation that keeps going on. And I think if we make the decision we want to be a region of rural communities, we have to support the schools. And I think 19, it's a subjective choice where you draw a line, but 19 feels like a lot better level than 25. Mitigation, I'm a bit confused because there seem to be different ideas on what we're trying to mitigate here, but if there are fluctuations that can only go upwards, then I would say we need an allocation for those fluctuations, and we shouldn't be raiding a fund which was passed by a majority in the budget. But I think there's a history to this, because I think that might have been the straw that broke the back of Councillor Nicholson's support for the administration at the time, and I know it was an attempt to get him back in, but it's ringing in my ears how he called for the scrapping or the non-allocating of that fund at the time, and now we're talking about bringing it back into education. But if we could go to SOSAT, that might be a good answer, because they have a considerable amount of money, and going back to the rurality of our region. We are a region of communities, so a communities enabling fund is an excellent thing. And when we ask for the money from SOSET, why don't we just add another zero to it?
They might not buy that one, but I've got also Councillor Lever and Councillor Wilson, and then I think I need to have some advice from the Governance Officer with regard to the process, because there's 3 separate proposals here, and they also, some of them would reverse decisions taken less than 6 months ago. So I think that we would need it would have to be a 2/3 majority for those. But I'll bring in Councillor Lever and Councillor Wilson, and then I'll ask Rona to give us some advice as to how we proceed.
It's just for clarification, Leader. Would use of the Change Fund impact on VPRs, for example? What impact would that have on future plans?
It's possibly something for the Finance Officer or the Chief Executive, probably. If we use the Change Fund for this, what is the Change Fund? I understood was actually partly enabled ERVS to take place. So.
Yeah, I'll allow Paul to do the detail, but we're in serious danger of trying to do the budget by default. And if we go back to the best value audit, it told members you have to take tough decisions. And what we seem to be doing here is trying to find a solution that would put even more pressure on frontline officers to find even more savings without the requisite. I think actually what we started the meeting on, if I can remind members, was about mitigation. And somehow we seem to be straying in to me having to go back to officers saying we wish to find further cuts. And that's what they would be, because there is not sufficient time to do it. So I think Paul can talk about the Change Fund, but certainly under the current policies, early retirement is the only option I've got to try and downsize the organisation. And certainly if we use that at this stage, we'd have to find that money somewhere else, and I'd be coming back, and I'd be probably requesting the full council myself to come back for proposals. But Paul.
Yep, the Change Fund was set up by members specifically to provide for investment required in the delivery of savings. And that investment is necessary because where savings, particularly when they relate to reductions in staffing, there is usually an investment required to affect that saving. The other thing with the Change Fund is its availability means that we don't have to increase our savings target on an annual basis to fund that investment. If we didn't have the Change Fund there, every year we'd have to look at our savings, work out how much we'd have to invest in them, and then add to the savings target to balance the budget. So that Change Fund is actually necessary to support members in their budget setting decisions on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson.
More a point of suggestion, a procedure. I think we run the risk of going round in circles. Maybe it would be an idea to have a recess for a short period to allow the sort of wording of motions to be brought forward, and then to come back and to seek any governance advice that may be needed on the wording of those motions. And then if members feel that we need another recess afterwards, then to go down that route. I like to see things in black and white, and I would like to see the wording of all the motions, and then seek any governance advice, and then if required have another recess to sort of discuss, and for members to reflect if they wish to support any of.
Councillor Ferguson, and then I'll...
Just for clarity at the same time, then can we get some guidance? My recollection is that Jeff, seconded by Rob, would be the motion. Ian, seconded by whoever would be the amendment, and Willie would be the counter amendment. Am I right? Thank you.
Okay.
I don't believe that was the case. I think we formally moved it first. I would question it. I'll go back to audio recording for sure if that's what we agree.
Jeff, was this the second speaker? If we look at it, Jeff was the second speaker. He proposed it then, and if we can find my list here, Rob was the fourth speaker, and he seconded it at that point. Okay, can we have some advice regarding procedure?
I think there's quite a range of issues, and some are mitigation and some are changing. I think what was decided within the 6 months. Therefore, I think the safest thing to do would be if someone would move a motion to just consider the whole thing in the round, and then if you get 2/3 for that, then we can move to consider the motion, the amendment and the counter amendment, because they've all got flavours of revoking some sort of decision or using a fund. I mean, I don't think it was in anyone's mind that the Community Initiative Fund might be used for this. So I think the safest thing to do would be to cover all the motions and the motion, the amendment and the counter amendment by preceding it with a motion that 2/3 of members present and voting are willing to consider those together.
I think we would take that motion now, and then if there are at least 2/3 of the members want to consider the other motions, we then go forward to have a recess to consider the other motions. Councillor Cross.
I think we're ruling out the potential opportunity to listen to all three at that point. I think we need to listen to all three. That's my understanding of what's been said, unless I've misunderstood.
Yeah, but we have to agree. We have to agree that because they are material change to a decision taken within 6 months, we have to take that we have to agree that first, and then we would be able to. And if 3 motions have been put forth, or a motion, an amendment, and a counter amendment have come forward, and they would all be considered. But I think first of all, I would move that we. What's the wording of the motion? I would move.
Material changes,
Yeah.
and that the motion.
Okay, so I would submit a motion to members that there has been a material change in circumstances, and the motion, amendment and counter amendment should be considered. Councillor Carruthers.
If we agree that, that's fine, but the only thing I'm saying is that our motion specifically built that into the recommendations that we're looking for a simple majority. We don't need 2/3 in ours, but fair enough to look at. If it's a yes, then it's fine. But I don't want it to be stopped for the sake of if the administration decide to vote against it.
Okay, Councillor Maitland. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much, Leader. Leader, I've listened very carefully to the debate. I'm quite happy to say that, in my view, there has not been any material change in circumstances, and therefore I propose we do not listen any further. We do not debate any further. The matter is closed.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Quite happy to second your motion.
So we move to the vote. Councillor Hislop.
Could you tell us what the material change was, just so that I would be able to support your move? Because there's 3 different views on it. There's some is mitigation, some that is we have to put some mitigation in place because we can't deliver the savings. What is the actual material change? Just so that we could, because I would like to have that on record so that we can actually support you.
Well, I think the material change is the requirement for mitigation. And then the three other proposals are different ways in which mitigation would be provided. Okay. Yeah. Do you have a second?
My dissent needs to be recorded.
Okay, right. So we've agreed that we will, and so I think what we, yes, I think, give it half an hour.
Lunch.
Colleagues, we've now got the copies of the motion, the amendment and the counter amendment in front of us, and the acting director of SIPL is still here. Unfortunately, her colleague has had to go to another meeting, but Gillian is available to ask any immediate questions. We've also got Paul Garrett is here as well if we've got questions of a financial nature on any of these. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Leader. I've just got a couple of questions on the sort of proposal that have been put in front of us. The Conservative amendment has number 2 to agree that as part of the transformational process, consideration is given to the impacts of future predicted savings being imposed on the Council will have on the delivery of an educational model. At the last meeting of the Transformation Board, we did agree to sort of do a review of the transformation process. We also agreed to do a review of the budget setting timescale. And I would just be concerned that actually, I was under the impression that the Transformation Board were being given the opportunity to have a full and frank conversation about what happened, what didn't happen, and what the expectations were. and that essentially we are going to have further meetings of that Transformation Board to fully get to grips with transformation of the council, and essentially because that Transformation Board also contains representatives who are not councillors, that Transformation Board will be given the sort of autonomy to propose to full council with, essentially no strings attached. And I would be concerned that this part 2, if you like, sort of maybe puts a hindrance on that ability of the Transformation Board to, be full and frank. But absolutely, some of the points that have been made in this point 2 could be taken through the Transformation Board. So I would just sort of like to raise that open. On the amendment from Councillor Scobie, I just have a couple of questions. I see there's a list of numbers. My first question would be if somebody could identify for me what the primary development budget is and also what the secondary development budget is. Point 2, I believe that some of particularly the reduced running costs in SIPL and the refocus support for learners, that some of that cut or saving, however you want to describe it, will have already taken place, and that some measures may already have happened, given the nature that the budget was set some time ago in the start of the financial year, as was over a month ago. And also, can we just confirm that the purchase of additional nurse roles is actually income generation for the council? And I would be keen to know sort of what income the council would therefore be forfeiting if we're to go with this proposal. But I would also like to just ask, on a matter of competence, this is a list of numbers and a proposal to take out of reserves without any due consideration as to what pressures may be on those reserves, as to what risk assessments are currently in place by this council on the need to use reserves in future, whether that be in the short or long term. And I would like to get to grips with actually what some of these things are.
Are you wanting an answer from the officers or from both? Yeah, okay. Paul, do you want to say something about the use of reserves?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, Councillor Scobie's proposal would use up to £2.461 million from general fund balances. As members have already agreed that their policy is to maintain balances at a minimum level of 2%, which equates to about £6.8 million. So this proposal would reduce that to about 1.25%. There's 2 or 3 issues with that. One, that would reduce the council's ability to deal with unexpected expenditure. Now, that hasn't been a significant issue for the council in the last few years. However, it has been for other councils, so we need to be recognised that that is a potentially significant risk for the council. But probably the more immediate concern would be that is non-recurring funding. So what that would mean would be you'd be increasing the savings target for subsequent financial years. And as we've already heard this morning, it's already an extremely challenging savings target that members are faced with. This would increase that target because of the non-recurring nature of the funding source. The other thing is that I would be advising members that you should look to rebuild those balances back up to a 2% level, so you then have a further savings requirement to accommodate that rebuilding. So there's a number of concerns with that.
Okay, Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, could I address the first point that Adam made? That shouldn't read, and I apologise, that should reduce, read reduce primary devolved budget. So my apologies for that, Chair. It's my typographical errors. On the figures, and these are all in thousands, and they were taken from the administration budget. So the figures are from there. As to whether savings have been affected currently, then if there is not a need, in, particularly in the 706,000, then I'm quite sure those could come back. But I do believe that not only the 706,000 needed, but a lot more. This is only identified in the actual budget. The 2% that Paul refers to, we did go below it in 2006-7, and indeed took the balances down to 1.6 or thereabouts £1 million. still with the same unexpected expenditure, and there was risk then, and the balances were built back up. And if the unexpected expenditure, and one of the explanations given yesterday was, well, we could have an expenditure on Brexit. Well, if I'm going to put education against Brexit, I know where my money's going to go in that respect. And I don't think, that there has been an FOI served on the council, that it still hasn't been replied to, as to how often balances has been used over the last 5 years or so, and that response has to be given. I think we will find that we haven't used balances for these unexpected expenditures, as is being said, to keep it at a prudent 2%. So in terms of increased savings in next year, I would hope we're not sitting in the same position, that we do change the hearts and minds of an SNP government, and they do look at how they fund local government in a proper way, so that we don't have the cuts that we're experiencing just now. And I would hope that I would have Adam Wilson behind me on that, rather than just making political statements and gestures.
Actually, for clarification, when the problems arose at NWCC and a number of emergency measures had to be taken, I presume that those had to be paid for out of balances in the first instance, but with the intention of reclaiming them from Southwest Hub and Graham's. Is that the case?
That is the case, although basically what we did was we assumed we would get income in at the same time, so we didn't report to members a reduction in balances at that stage. What we tend to do is review our balances at the end of each financial year and ensure that they're in line with that 2% level. Can also just make, in terms of the 2006-7, when we reduced balances, that was on a very temporary basis. There was a decision taken which would have reduced balances, but members then took a number of decisions very quickly after to rebuild those, to make further savings and rebuild those balances very quickly.
I suppose my point with regard to NWCC is concerned is that had we not had the balances, we would not have been able to make the necessary arrangements to ensure that the teaching and learning and the experience of young people continued in the way it should have done. Would I be correct in assuming that we had no budget? I've got a number of other people. Gail McGregor?
Oh. Sorry, I thought my phone was ringing at the same time there, I got a panic. Thank you, Leader. I just want to draw members' attention firstly to the Conservative group's amendment, which makes specific reference to the 200,000 required, up to 200,000 required in respect of mitigation of the two-teacher school situation at the moment. And my understanding is that that has been taken on advice from the Finance Officer, that we may require up to that figure. So I then turn to the administration's motion, and while I'm pleased that they're acknowledging that there will be a funding gap in the proposed budget saving, I do now wonder, given that they're only making mention of the Community Enablement Fund, which I understand is 285,000, if there will be sufficient in that fund to mitigate against all the budget savings proposals that may come forward in July, because I noticed that their motion contains the primary class size composition as well. And I just wonder if the administration need to be identifying additional funding, given that it has now acknowledged that they will have to identify potential areas of mitigation.
Well, I think the other difference is that you are suggesting in your motion that you continue with the single teacher schools cap as is, whereas ours is not doing that. Ours is identifying the fact that there will be a report to SIPL in July. Members will have the opportunity to examine that report and to discover whether if these are identified. We're not saying they will be identified. What we are saying is if these are identified through member scrutiny at SIPL. So that's the difference, is that we're not assuming that we were going to have to find 200. That 200,000 would be to reverse the reduction in the primary school. I'm trying to think primary class composition. That would be the cost of reversing primary class composition. We're not suggesting we're doing that. We're suggesting there might be certain actions that we need to be taken in the shorter term to be able to ease some of that transition. So it is a bit different to your proposal.
Okay, so are you changing the wording of your motion then, because it says quite explicitly will identify, and as you're forging ahead with the single teacher proposals, I wonder if that shouldn't be may identify.
No, it says if these are identified, is it? And by potential areas, will identify potential areas of mitigation. Councillor Davidson.
You have indeed hit on it. The requirement is that identify potential areas. It's always a matter ultimately for member scrutiny and judgment. Officers will propose. It's a matter for us to assess whether we consider a case has been made and the resources that we wish to apply if we are convinced the case has been made. We have identified a source from which that funding, that revenue support would come. But we're very clear, I think, although naturally these have all been typed in haste. I think they have all been typed in haste looking at the typographical errors in the Conservative amendment, that this is looking for potential areas of mitigation, and these will be scrutinised by members. Ultimately, it is we who will make the decision.
Okay, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. I thought I had clear questions, but some of these questions and answers, I'm not too sure now. I think Gail's answered one of them. If we can take it, the 200,000 would be enough to keep the for the upcoming year for the 2 teacher schools. I think that's. But in your in the administration motion, there's nothing to stop that happening within that, because if it's identified at CYPLL that is then needed. Identified measures, any measures, it doesn't specify any measures within that. If it's identified through member scrutiny that would need to happen to make it a viable proposition for the future, then that is part of that £285,000 if you want. So it's, if it goes to SIPL and then they decide that these measures had to be taken, there's nothing to stop that being taken. But what you're doing now is trying to put the horse before the cart before the horse in the other motion, because you're actually saying that's got to happen now and then take that money first. So I hope I'm clear about that, because I'm not too sure and can I just ask one thing on the measures for the Community Initiative Enablement Fund? And you did say that fund is to be put on hold. Is it the fund that's to be put on hold, or is it the community enablement part of it without the money? Because you need a review, if that money was used, you need a review how to fund the community's enablement funding, if you know what I mean, if you've used that money. So is it the fund, or is it?
I think it's a development of the fund will be put on hold at the moment because it's a new fund. But simultaneously, we will try and find other ways of funding it through SOCEP. But I don't know that needs to be part of the motion now. But that will be the intention, would be to try to find an alternative way of funding it through the Interim Enterprise Agency.
Yes, I think that's what I was trying to get, a review of the funding and how it is funded. So it's there, but it's not having any money if it's been used for education. But if it's not been used, then obviously.
But we would know how much of it is left after members have had a chance to scrutinise at SIPL the reports on both the sport, and it is both the refocusing of the sport for learners and the primary size guidance, the primary class size composition matching national guidance. It's both, because there could be issues around the refocus of the support for learning services. There might not be much on class size composition, but maybe something might transpire with regard to the support for learning service. We don't actually know that at the moment. So, Councillor Maitland.
Gosh, if I was to ask for a full council meeting every time somebody thought there might be something happening, I think we'd be here till kingdom come. I don't think the case has been made, and what better public forum than a full council meeting like we've got now to have made the case for any changes. They haven't been made. So, as I say, we are simply kicking the can down the road in this particular instance. People are not being terribly brave. Now, I know it's difficult, but I've asked for information about what is the difference between changing the numbers from 19 to 25. I've asked for help on this, and I am not receiving any from the actual suggesters that there is this major impact. Nobody has produced me from the political spectrum what is the impact that is going to be got from this. I haven't had it. The other thing that I'm concerned about is this Community Initiatives Enablement Fund, which my colleague did actually think it probably was to do with community projects and people having in their ideas that this will actually smooth projects into community ownership. I would like to be completely clear about the status of this fund. It's new indeed, but it's been promised to us, I think, if I haven't got this wrong. I can't imagine that we would be talking about it at all if it hadn't been promised to us. And SOSEP is nothing but a twinkle in your eyes.
No, so SOSEP exists at the moment as the interim partnership, and it receives £10 million a year from the Scottish Government, last year and this year, £7 million for capital and £3 million for revenue. So it very definitely does exist. So is the new enterprise, the actual one set up in legislation, is likely to come in April next year. But there is a pot of money which we actually tapped into for the Annan initiative. So there is a possibility of receiving money if we have a good enough case. But can I also say that we're not saying that we're going to use up all the money. We can't answer the questions about whether or not there is an impact because we haven't had the report which is going to SIPL in July. We won't know until July what those are. And it isn't the administration which called this meeting. This was not our idea to have this meeting this early. If it had been up to us, we would have these discussions later on when we had the evidence, but that was out of our hands. Others wanted to have the meeting sooner rather than later. Councillor Carruthers.
I'm more than happy to take questions from different members and answer them, but it has to be through yourself, obviously, because that's the format that we have. So go back to earlier that Councillor Wilson made the point in regards to the second recommendation. Now, when that came this morning, the first chance we had as a group to look at that, it was a lot meatier, a lot more, you could say, punchier, or even dictatorial. So we really did lessen that, but we think it's important that the full council sends a clear message to the Transformation Board to consider as part of their process, not to instruct, but to consider. So they take consideration of the points that are alluded to that, and we think it's appropriate that it stays there. We're not being dictatorial. And the background to that is, because I hear Councillor Baton say it's pathetic, that's being said there, is that when we're talking to the wider public of Dumfries and Galloway, what they're saying is, okay, you're proposing to take two teacher primary schools down to single, when actually what you really need to do is look at the rural rationalisation across Dumfries and Galloway in regards to schools. That's where the budget is, that's where it lies. You need to be making the real decisions that need to be made and face up to that. So that is to make absolutely clear that Transformation Board, okay, it looks at council priorities, it may well go beyond that, it may not, but it looks at the whole implications. So that's my answer back to Councillor Maitland, with respect, Leader. I'm not looking at just I was asked the question, I'm trying to answer them as best I can. I have got a question on your own actual proposal. If you don't mind, then, so it states quite clear we're not, the report coming to SIPL in July will identify potential areas of mitigation, and it goes on, but it focuses on the national guidance in regards to class size. So Councillor McGregor's already touched on it. I spoke about it earlier. So as part of the consideration on that, and what we're proposing, considering all we're asking for is between £50,000 and £200,000, but it's fluid, so it could be as high as 200, but it could be as little as £50,000 spend is what we're talking about to retain that. So what we're saying is, okay, under your recommendation, for what I can see, unless we consider that 20, so it would change from 18 to 20 if that was the case, but if we take consideration the practical classes and the criteria that was applied to secondaries and apply that to primaries, that's fair enough, but we look at the national guidance, Springfield will end up a one-teacher school. And that's one of the things we are attempting in our proposal to stop that. And it's small sums of money. Other than that, it's almost identical. There's very little in it. You're proposing to defer at this moment in time, get further information, consider it later on at different the SIPL Service Committee. We can make a simple, low-cost decision today that will mitigate towards the single teacher primary schools in particular. It's quite simple. We feel, looking at that, unless you can clarify otherwise, but that rules Springfield as being a single teacher primary school because you're sticking to that. Paragraph 2.9, page 19 in the appendix.
Yes, you're right. And can I say just on the issue, I know you weren't able to get to the last Transformation Board meeting, but that was discussed in a fair amount of detail. And I felt that certainly there was an agreement there that we will be looking at a different process. And there were a number of suggestions around see if I can get this right, Kaizen Blitz, is that correct? Chief Executive process where you can get have all the stakeholders involved in a discussion about how you take things forward. So some of that could be about school estate, it could be about models of additional support for learning and so on. So that's actually under discussion at the moment. The other thing that we were keen to do is review the budget process so that we can actually have all the budgets, not just the administration's budgets published, but all the groups who want to publish a budget, publishing their budgets by the end of the year and allowing a process when those budgets can be consulted upon, and actually we can consult between the groups about maybe aspects of each other's budgets which we think are worth considering. So that is actually underway, and I think it would probably be a bit more radical than what you've got in section 2 then, but that is actually underway as part of the transformation process, which is what Councillor Wilson was saying. With regard to the other aspect, we are referring specifically to the 2 budget lines that we were talking about. We're not, the reason it says a primary class size composition is actually to look at that budget line and the refocusing of the support for learning, to look at those 2 budget lines of that report which comes back, which may identify, which may identify issues that have to be smoothed during the transition period. But it is different from yours. It's not, it looks on the first surface, first glances of ours are very similar, but there are actually quite significant differences between the 2.
We understand, because that's 2 recommendations. I take it they'll be added to the wider recommendations are there, but it's noted within the recommendations contained within the report that these reports are coming anyways. So we've took that into consideration, that this stuff's coming forward anyways. We've been told about that. It is coming, we realise that. So we're looking at supported learning, supported needs, so on and so forth. So that's coming, we're aware of that. You've added it in, so it's further, it's additionality to the recommendations are there. But I still think to protect our single teacher primary schools between £50,000 and £100,000, there's ambiguity over how much yours will actually cost. Likely it'll go beyond the cost of the community initiatives, not initiatives, apologies for that typo, enabling fund. But anyways, that's, I suppose, without going back to the 3 minutes that I've got and answer any questions, I'm quite happy to answer any questions with regards to our motion, but I think that's why our should be supported. It's not political, it's quite clear we're taking taking a steer from the members of the public, parents, teachers, actually, in real fair, whether employed with Dumfries and Galloway or out with, and it's something what we think potentially, because we know it within the report in regards to additional supported learning and supported needs, there's further reports coming, we can look at that later on. So therefore, it would stop this single teacher primary school crisis right at this moment in time. As of today, we have sovereignty.
Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Lydia. Just a point of clarification. I didn't quite hear it. Councillor Cooler said something along the lines of people across the region are wanting the full rationalisation of something. I wondered if he can just confirm what he said and expand on what he means by it.
What people are saying to us is that at this moment in time, this is parent councils, community councils, head teachers, so on and so forth, in confidence, is that get on and make the big decisions. So I'm just relaying what they've said. You're scratching on the surface. In real terms, what the council is doing at this moment in time is bullying and poking away at the little schools when actually it should be looking at the bigger picture. So I'll just relay what they've said to me, rather than try to put words out of my mouth. That's what they've said to me, and that's exactly the comments I think we've all been getting via email as well. Stop mucking about. If you've got 30 to £50 million worth of savings, get on and make the proper decisions that have to be made.
Well, can I reiterate that the process that we're entering into with the transformation programme will allow people to have those sorts of discussions?
Transformation Board, sorry, later last will come in with respect, but Transformation Board is it sits in private, has a lot of stakeholders, so on and so forth. This is in the public domain. If we agree to this, it's quite clear. And all we're saying is, listen, please consider as part 2. That's why I've made enough points. I think our motion should be supported.
I'm talking about is this, and again, I appreciate that you weren't able to get to the meeting. I don't know whether you had the chance to read the papers for the meeting, but they did describe a process by which you could actually have a very in-depth engagement with all stakeholders while looking at these issues. And that's actually one of the things we intend to take forward in our early course. Councillor Wilson, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, so it's just on that. I mean, I think probably here today we're getting on with those big decisions, but, quite often we hear things said about, rationalising the school estate. Fine. Actually, so what do the Conservatives support and what do Ian Crowther support? Does Ian Crowther support closing small schools or closing schools within Dumfries or Annan. You know, we can't just have these statements being made without actually the full facts behind them being divulged. You have to be open and honest. You're wanting us to be open and honest, quite rightly so. You need to be open and honest too.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, Chair, I was at the Transformational Board and I don't think anything was agreed. There was a lot of talk around many things, but there was not an agreement reached.
Well, the Transformation Board doesn't make...
Sorry?
The Transformation Board isn't enabled to make decisions because it's not a committee of the council.
Absolutely. So, you know, until we make the decision how we move forward, then that's when we know what will happen on next year. Rather than making reference to the Transformational Board. Can I move on to the point, Chair? And I'm looking at both the administration, SNP Labour Administration's proposal and that of the Tory group's proposal. Both one recognises a £200,000 or up to £200,000 on the Tory, and the SNP Labour Administration doesn't recognise any figure, although we've heard that initiative is sitting at, the Community Initiative Enablement Fund is sitting at 285. We heard Ian say there, Ian Carruthers say there, that he's taking it from all the parents. Well, all the parents are saying that education matters, both in small schools and the larger, and to reverse the cuts on primary class composition and refocus support for learners where there's a reduction of 706,000, that totals 1.263 million. Neither the 200,000 identified in the Tory proposal or no figure, but we know there's 285k in Labour, SNP Labour's, may not address the issues that are coming up in the SNP Labour's proposal if there is a need for monies to be injected into the refocusing and the support for learners, and indeed the small schools, the 19, because this appears to have a two-tier system where if you're a small school with 25, you will be with 2 teachers, but in a general throughout the rest of Dumfries and Galloway, you know, you could be sitting with a 25 and so forth. So there is an almost two-tier in that, in the Tories' proposal. And that's not what the parents are saying that I've spoken to across the board. They're saying that they want to see the cuts reversed, and that's why I'll stand by my amendment.
Councillor Dryburgh.
Thanks very much, Chair. What I've heard so far is if, and if, and if, and if, and if this happens, if that happens, and we are going to try and make a decision today on ifs. We have got to move forward and understand and make the fullest get the fullest information here next year so that we can make a decision. Now, there's a process already in place, and that's going to go to SIPL in July. The decision of that committee will come forward, I would imagine, and will suggest whether there is going to be any mitigation required or not. But if we keep on going if, we're going to put our finger up in the air and say this is how much it's actually going to cost, and if we get it totally wrong, and it doesn't cost anything, then we've just wasted a full day in full council. This needs to happen in the right process, and we need to go to SIPL with the report that's coming, with the potential for mitigation. If there's any mitigation required, then we need to do that. It's all about making sure that we have the fullest information in front of us. Yes, we can go to parent councils and we can suggest that this is going to happen. Yes, we can go to the school teachers and they can suggest that this is going to happen. But until we get the fullest of information in front of us, we can't make a decision. And that decision through our motion is the way to go. Get it to SIPL.
Is there an appetite to have a further recess, or are people happy to proceed to the vote? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Nicholson.
Can I suggest, and you can take it on board if you have the recess, that you slightly change the implementation of the community initiatives to the implementation of the £285,000 community initiative enablement fund and you carry on and take out the if those are identified, because that's relevant to support mitigation measures, identifying 3-member scrutiny at CYPLL, and review how funding of the Communities Enablement Fund is achieved. Future enablement. And you can take that away in your recess and you can have a wee.
I don't think there was any appetite for further recess. So, but I'll look to the proposer to seconded. How you feel?
Yeah, I appreciate what Councillor Nicholson said, but I'm quite happy with the funding, the wordings today. So I think we need to move on with this. Otherwise, drag on all day.
Okay, so are we ready to proceed to the vote? No, Councillor Carruthers.
No, I think standard laws dictates that the movers and seconders, so on and so forth, get final say, and I just, whether we go out in a particular order, I mean, I've very little to add other than for obvious reasons, we wish to see this supported.
Councillor Scobie, have anything further to say with regard to your counter amendment?
Not really, Chair. I think I addressed it, and if education matters, I would hope it does. Unfortunately, the motion for the Tories doesn't cover the whole thing, and we did discuss this, that it should have covered the whole, not just the small schools. And I think Councillor Nicholson offered a reasonable amendment there to the Labour. So, no, I will stick by that we do. Education matters, and we should take it for reserves, given the position that we have been put in.
Councillor Giusti, do you have anything you want to say as a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. My reason for seconding this motion is because I believe that we need to go into these harder cuts that we're going to make in the future. We need to go into them from a position of strength, with plenty of resources in our schools, to make it easier and to make the transition much better for our students.
Councillor Carruthers, do you want to say anything else?
As part of our, we've proposed the two items as is, but we expect that the rest of the motions contained within the report still to stand. So go back to Councillor Scobie's point, I would just say that we fully expect a full discussion at the Children and Young People Lifelong Learning in regards to what's been outlined already, the supported learning and supported needs discussion that needs to take place, because that's already in train.
Councillor Hislop?
Chair, I just think we should move to the vote, or else it'll be July and we'll not have moved forward.
I was going to, but I was reminded that people had the right to speak. The proposer and seconder had the right to speak. So, Councillor Lever.
Sorry, Chair. No, there's nothing really I want to add. I think we talked this one to death. Basically, using such a huge amount of the reserves, given what we know is going to be the financial landscape in the future and what's going to happen with Brexit. I think that would be a very, very dangerous move.
Councillor Davison.
I'll be very brief. The administration proposes a way forward which will allow the facts and evidence to be advanced for member scrutiny, and at the same time identifies a means by which resources can be applied to mitigation measures if members consider they are required based on facts and evidence, which have not been to the fore today.
Can we proceed to the vote in that case?
Thank you, Leader. Just a reminder to members and for members of the public, the way that we proceed when we have three different choices is the counter amendment goes against the amendment for the first vote, and then the winner of that will be put up against the motion. So we have the counter amendment by Councillor Scobie, seconded by Councillor Giusti, and the amendment proposed by Councillor Carruthers and seconded by Councillor Hislop. Leader.
Abstain.
Deputy Leader.
Abstain.
Councillor Bell.
Amendment.
Councillor Blake.
Amendment.
Councillor Doogie Campbell.
Abstain.
Councillor John Campbell.
Abstain.
Councillor Ian Carruthers.
Amendment.
Councillor Karen Carruthers.
Amendment.
Councillor Dempster.
Abstain.
Councillor Dryborough.
Abstain.
Councillor Drysdale.
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson.
Abstain.
Councillor Giusti.
Counter amendment.
Councillor Hagman.
Abstain.
Councillor Howie. Councillor Hislop. Councillor Ingalls. Councillor James. Councillor Johnston.
Amendment.
Councillor Lever.
Abstain.
Councillor Little.
Abstain.
Councillor McGregor.
Amendment.
Councillor Maitland.
Amendment.
Councillor Marshall.
Abstain.
Councillor Martin.
Abstain.
Councillor McClelland. Councillor McComb.
Amendment.
Councillor McKee. Councillor Nicholl.
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson.
Abstain.
Councillor Scobie.
Counter amendment.
Councillor Sloan.
Counter amendment.
Councillor Stitt.
Abstain.
Councillor Surtees.
Abstain.
Councillor Tate. Oh, sorry, he's gone, sorry. Councillor Thompson.
Abstain.
Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wood.
Abstain.
Councillor Young.
Abstain.
The amendment carries 14 votes to 3 with 21 abstentions. So we now move to the amendment and the motion. So that's the motion that was proposed by Councillor Lever, seconded by the Deputy Leader, and the amendment proposed by Councillor Carruthers and seconded by Councillor Hislop. Leader?
Motion.
Deputy Leader?
Motion.
Councillor Bell?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Amendment.
Councillor Dougie Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor John Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor Ian Carruthers?
Amendment.
Councillor Karen Carruthers?
Amendment.
Councillor Dempster?
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough?
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale?
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson?
Motion.
Councillor Giusti?
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman?
Motion.
Councillor Howie? Councillor Hislop? Councillor Ingalls? Councillor James? Councillor Johnston? Councillor Lever?
Motion.
Councillor Little?
Motion.
Councillor McGregor?
Amendment.
Councillor Maitland?
Motion.
Councillor Marshall?
Motion.
Councillor Martin?
Motion.
Councillor McClelland?
Motion.
Councillor McComb?
Motion.
Councillor McKee? Councillor Nicholl?
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson?
Abstain.
Councillor Scobie?
Abstain because I don't trust any of the two of them.
Councillor Sloan?
Motion.
Councillor Stitt?
Motion.
Councillor Surtees?
Motion.
Councillor Thompson?
Motion.
Councillor Wilson?
Motion.
Councillor Wood?
Motion.
And Councillor Young.
Motion.
The motion carries 24 votes to 12 with 2 abstentions.
Thank you, colleagues.